A birthday present. On 25th December 1940, Muhammad Ali Jinnah was 64 years old. A startling white lock showed in his grey hair, but he was still as slim, erect, and quick in his movements as when he was young. His name was now the one light of hope for most of the Muslims in India, not merely the educated classes, but also the wide eyed, illiterate masses called him Qaid Azam, the great leader. His heart might have warmed a little at the reception given him on his birthday. 83 eminent men of all religions paid tribute to him. Dr. C.R. Reddy, a Hindu, Vice Chancellor of the Andhra University, wrote, "He is the pride of India and not the private possession of the Muslims." Sir Frederick James, a Christian, wrote of Jinnah's unique parliamentary gifts, and then, "He is a powerful debater and a first class strategist, a leader of men, fearless and incorruptible." Sir R. K. Shanmughan Chitty, another Hindu, wrote, "Mr. Jinnah is a realistic patriot. He yields to none in his enthusiasm to obtain the political emancipation of his country." Sir Kovesji Jahangir, a Parsi, who had known him in the first days of his beefless struggle in the law courts, recalled Jinnah's sturdy independence and courage and tenacity. He added, "He has never put self or his own interests before those of his country." Rao Bahadur M.C. Raja, a Hindu and a leader of the depressed classes, the untouchables, contributed a thoughtful message that should be read at length. All religions hold the belief that God sends suitable men into the world to work out his plans from time to time and at critical junctures. I regard Mr. Jinnah as the man who has been called upon to correct the wrong ways into which the people of India have been led by the Congress. Under the leadership of Mr. Gandhi, the Congress did a great service to the country so long as it followed the lines of critical cooperation and cooperative criticisms towards the British government, as laid out by Dadabhai Nauroji and Gokhale. But it took a wrong turn when it adopted wholesale the non cooperation program of Mr. Gandhi and assumed an attitude of open hostility towards Britain and tried to infuse in the minds of the people a spirit of defiance of law and civil disobedience, more or less thinly veiled under a formula of truth and nonviolence. Moreover, by Mahatmafying Mr. Gandhi, it appealed to the idolatrous superstitions of the Hindus, thus converting the religious adherents of the Hindu section of the population to the Mahatma into political support of his non cooperation program. While this strategy was of some avail in hustling the British government to yield more and more to the demands of Congress, it divided the people into Hindu and non Hindu sections. In these circumstances, a man was needed to stand up to Congress and tell its leaders that their organization, however powerful numerically and financially, does not represent the whole of India. I admire Mr. Jinnah and feel grateful to him because, in advocating the cause of the Muslims, he is championing the claims of all classes who stand the danger of being crushed under the steamroller of a Hindu majority, acting under the inspiration and orders of Mr. Gandhi. These birthday tributes to the Qaeda-Azam came about the time that he moved into a new, splendid house that had been designed and built for him. The old house in Mount Pleasant Road, where he had lived first as a bachelor and then during the years of his marriage, had been a Goanese bungalow. Perhaps its ghost had become oppressive, for in 1939 he had ordered that it should be pulled down and above its dust he built a mansion. In the meantime, he had made his home in Little Gibbs Road higher up on Malabar Hill. Nothing remains of the temporary house in Little Gibbs Road in May 1952. A block of apartments was rising from the rubble, and there were few signs that anyone had ever lived there. only 12 cracked white bathroom tiles, leaning against a pile of new red bricks. But the view from the eminence was one for a conqueror to enjoy. The Arabian Sea, framed between the scarlet moho trees and the noise of the waves beating on the rocks below, the waves that beat on the shores of India and Pakistan alike. Next to the rubble and new bricks is a big house with a lawn and garden. On the day in May 1952, there were three Parsi ladies on the lawn, like fabulous butterflies, in their lovely saris, taking the evening air. When one of them was asked, "Do you know in which house Muhammad Ali Jinnah lived?" she answered quickly, "Oh, they have pulled it down. It was up there. I remember him. I knew him well. I used to see him almost every day. So erect and such charm. He always took off his hat and said good morning." The grand house into which Jinnah moved about the time of his 64th birthday is now the residence of the British Deputy High Commissioner, and his name is on the gate. But the Hindu taxi drivers, scorning the prejudice of partisans, still say, "You mean the Jinnah house?" When the traveler asks to be taken there, at the end of a short drive stands the mansion that celebrated the first year of Jinnah's unbridled success, an edifice of wide balconies, broad, high rooms, and a marble portico leading onto a marble terrace. In another part of Bombay lives the architect Mr. Claude Bartley, who designed the new house for Jinnah. He has recalled that Qaeda-Azam asked for a big reception room, a big veranda, and big lawns for garden parties, and that he appointed a Muslim clerk of works, an English builder, a Hindu plumber, and Italian stonemasons. Jinnah insisted on choosing the colors of the marble for the terrace and standing by when the pieces of stone were fitted, much to the annoyance of the Italian who was doing the work. He was most correct in his ideas, added Mr. Bartley. His standard was a building that did not leak. Unfortunately, as so often happens with a new house, there was a leak, and he was furious. The leak was mended, and Qaeda Azam and Miss Jinnah moved in. The pattern of life they assumed was very different from the old days, when the advocate, at the timid beginning of his political career, sat alone in his study with neither secretary nor clerk to help him. Now that he had become the great leader, he had to build up a little court, so necessary for a man who was about to create a nation. Jinnah's relation with his staff were revealing. He was an exacting master, but the young men who worked for him were devoted, and their character was fertilized by the example of his integrity. One of them, who worked with Qaid Azam in later years, has described this influence. In an incident from his own experience, he has said, "I was tantalized by the Qaid's aloofness and silence. I was never able to make him relax with me. I suppose that I was piqued because of this, and I wished very much to know what was in his mind." He kept no diary, but there was a little book in which he made occasional entries. He kept it locked in a drawer. One day I found it on his desk, and being alone, I turned over the pages. Here, I thought, are the innermost thoughts none of us are allowed to know. I stole the book. I took it to my room, and I kept it for 2 hours. Then my conscience began to talk to me, because he was not the sort of man one would ever wish to deceive. So I took the book back again and put it on the desk where I found it. Cripps, on his recent visit to India, explaining the Muslim point of view, his expression of agreement with me appeared genuine. But even had he disagreed, I feel there was justification for the complete misrepresentation of my views. amounting to nothing less than deliberate falsehood, which he published in a newspaper on his return to England. I'm aware that he was not at the time a member of your Fabian party, but I thought he occupied an important position in the public and his own profession. Sir Stafford Cripps landed in Delhi on 22nd March, and 1 week later he declared that His Majesty's government had decided to lay down in precise and clear terms the steps which they propose shall be taken for the earliest possible realization of self government in India. The object was to create a new Indian Union, which would constitute a dominion associated with the United Kingdom and the other dominions by a common to the crown, but equal to them in every respect, in no way subordinate in any aspect of its domestic or external affairs. All this immediately upon the cessation of hostilities. Without mentioning Pakistan or the Muslims, the draft declaration conceded the right way of any province that was not prepared to accept the new constitution to retain its present constitutional position, and Britain was willing, with such non acceding provinces, should they so desire, to agree upon a new constitution giving them the same full status as the Indian Union. The time chosen for this offer was perhaps inopportune. Britain was still at war, and the fortunes of battle were uncertain in most theatres of conflict. In March, the Japanese had entered Rangoon. It was with them in the east that India's chief danger lay. On 18 March, Mr. Roosevelt had written to Mr. Churchill, "The Japanese may land on the sea coast of Burma. They might bombard Calcutta." The leaders of Congress and of the League might have thought more of the mission if Sir Stafford had arrived at a time when the Allies were marching to victory. But the leaders of both parties seemed to believe that Britain would be defeated. They declined the Cripps offer, which was allegedly described by Gandhi as a post dated check on a bank that was obviously crashing. Mr. Casey, who records this episode, wrote that he had undisputed and conclusive evidence that the rejection was greatly regretted in 1943 and 1944, when it was clear that we were going to win the war. It is refreshing to turn from the piles of books and documents describing the mission to the simplicity of Sir Winston Churchill's record of the events, from the day when Sir Stafford, with great public spirit, volunteered for this thankless and hazardous task, to the day 1 month later when he telegraphed from India. I have tonight received long letter from Congress President stating that Congress is unable to accept proposals. There is clearly no hope of agreement, and I shall start home on Sunday. Later the same day, Sir Stafford sent a further telegram to the Prime Minister. My own view is that despite failure, the atmosphere has improved quite definitely. Nehru has come out in a fine statement for total war against the Japanese. Jinnah has pledged me unwavering support of the Muslims. We are not depressed, though sad at that result. Now we must get on with the job of defending India. Even Sir Winston Churchill's account of the failure of the mission reveals little awareness of the separate plight of the Muslims. And Mr. Roosevelt's letters at the time show, as Sir Winston admits, that the president's mind was back at the American War of Independence, and that he thought of the Indian problem in terms of the 13 colonies fighting George III at the end of the 18th century. The thoughts of the Congress leaders on this offer from their British overlords were naturally confused by the more terrible threat of danger from the advancing forces of the Japanese. Mahatma Gandhi wrote, "The presence of the British in India is an invitation to Japan to invade India. Their withdrawal would remove the bait. Free India would be better able to cope with invasion." At this time, fear of the Japanese was such in Calcutta that Indian servants deserted their post and escaped inland. British officers, including the military secretary to the governor, finished their task by day and worked in the British soldiers' canteen at night, in place of the Indians who had fled. Pandit Nehru said, on the day after Sir Stafford's departure, "We are not going to surrender to the invader. In spite of all that has happened, we are not going to embarrass the British war effort in India." In his presidential address to the Allahabad session of the Muslim League in April, Jinnah did not relate the failure of the mission to the perils of the war. He said, I think I am echoing your feelings when I say that the Muslims feel deeply disappointed that the entity and integrity of the Muslim nation has not been expressly recognized. Muslim India will not be satisfied unless the right of national self determination is unequivocally recognized. I trust that in order to give real effect to the principles of Pakistan and Muslim self determination, His Majesty's government and Sir Stafford Cripps will not hesitate to make the necessary adjustments on their behalf. Let us hope that there will emerge out of these negotiations a settlement that will be just, honorable, and finally acceptable to all. Elder British statesmen and soldiers who had been in India for many years were aggrieved over the continuous failure to bring Congress, the League, and Westminster together with one mind. They believed in their own good intentions, and that their service in India was not all for their own selfish sake. They believed also that the Indians had been allowed as many reforms as they could absorb. In view of the racial bitterness, class antagonism, and illiteracy that manacled the country and held it back, they knew that concessions towards freedom should be granted, not as demanded by the Indians, but according to their capacity to administer them with justice and cool reason. This view was shared by Mr. Casey. His was not a prejudiced English view. He had been born in Australia, another land that had suffered under the yoke of Britain, and emerged like any boy from a good school, proud and independent, but still devoted to his alma mater. Mr. Casey wrote of the melancholy story of India, a story of hope and sincere endeavor, frustrated by fear and suspicion. Then, we have not been dilatory in India by way of constitutional reforms. We have pressed on with all the speed that was wise and practicable. Indeed, we have pressed on probably in advance of the ability of the country to take advantage of the progressive steps towards self government that we have made possible.